This episode is sponsored by NordVPN, the best and safest way to protect your online private data. Sign up to NordVPN now and get an exclusive discount by going to nordvpn.com/evolutionofhorror. That's nordvpn.com/evolutionofhorror. In 1932, Universal Pictures followed up James Whale's Frankenstein with another horror film about a mad doctor. This time, they brought Dracula star Bela Lugosi back for a loose adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue. This film was less successful than Frankenstein, but in many ways darker and more disturbing, containing explicit scenes of torture and themes of bestiality.
It will only last one more minute and we shall see. We shall know if you are to be the pride of science.
Later that year, Paramount Pictures released a film with many similarities, an adaptation of a literary source, this time H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau, about a mad doctor featuring a performance from Bela Lugosi that contained themes of bestiality and strong scenes of sadism and torture. This film, far more powerful than Murders in the Rue Morgue, proved too much for audiences at the time and was banned in the UK and several other countries around the world. It's now thought of as one of the best and most shocking horror films of the 1930s.
Not men! Not bees! Part man! Part bees!
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of man-made monsters, and we discuss Universal's Murders in the Rue Morgue and Paramount's The Island of Lost Souls. Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Muncer, and as ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the midst of our 11th season, exploring the evolution of man-made monsters, and this is part 9. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be talking about two pretty disturbing monster movies from the early 30s. That's Murders in the Rue Morgue from 1932 and The Island of Lost Souls, also from 1932. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. Give both films a watch before you listen to our discussion. They are both breezy 60 to 70 minute films and are both quite odd, but they've kind of got to be seen to be believed. So joining me to discuss these two films, a returning guest. He was here just a couple of weeks ago discussing Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein with me, and he's back. A big welcome to James Swanton. Hello, James.
Hello, Mike. Thank you for having me back for about the 18th time this series.
You're our new series regular this year, apparently.
Gosh,
I love it.
Just part of the furniture.
How are you doing, James? I'm quite. I don't know about you, but I'm quite enjoying feeling a little autumn chill in the air. You know, I was done with summer.
I was done with summer before summer started.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm feeling a great deal better now. The days are drawing in and the weather is cooler and wetter.
Oh, lovely.
I get busy at the end of the year, of course. I'm doing my many Charles Dickens performances in York and London. So
yes.
Yeah, I'm coming back into my own. I'm back in my element in these darker times.
Absolutely. Well, it's lovely to have you back. So obviously, since you were last here, we've discussed a slew of other Frankenstein movies, and now we're sort of starting back again, sort of talking about other kind of monster films. And it's interesting how many there are to discuss around this time. Of course, last week we discussed The Invisible Man and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as well. Obviously, we've got two more to discuss this week. How important was the success of Frankenstein, do you think, in 1931 to this slew of kind of mad scientist movies that we seem to have had around the early 1930s?
Well, I'm not really saying anything new, but I don't think it's importance can very well be overestimated. And certainly coming to these two films we're about to discuss today, both of them pretty well borrow the 1931 Frankenstein's core idea, which is essentially the creation or cultivation of life by unconventional means. Now, I say that's the core idea of the 1931 Frankenstein, but it could just as well describe the core of the 1931 Dracula. I mean, what is a vampire's quest if not creating or cultivating life by unconventional means? So, in that way, it's very, very pleasing that in these two films we get Bela Lugosi, Hollywood's Dracula, in contrasting monstrous roles. There are a few other links between these films, which I'm sure haven't passed you by. They were both first screened in 1932. They both feature a mad Dr. M.
Yes.
Miracle in the case of Murders in the Rue Morgue, and Moreau in the case of Island of Lost Souls. And I think probably most importantly, both of them really emphasise bestiality. So we're crossing over a bit, aren't we, Mike, from man-made monsters to man-mating monsters. And
very good. Yes.
It's about the most sordid and icky little area we could be delving into.
It's so
Thank God
true.
you didn't start the series here.
Well, exactly. And it feels like it's a bit of a crossover with the theme we discussed last year about kind of nature biting back and kind of animal attack movies as well. There's a lot of crossover in this week's double bill, I think, which has been really interesting. And obviously we are going to talk about, last week we talked about a Universal monster movie, but also Paramount. And I think it's interesting, again, this is something that Kim Newman mentioned on the podcast once, that, again, after Universal has such huge success with Dracula and Frankenstein, it was like every other kind of major Hollywood studio sort of followed suit over the next couple of years. And do you think there is, I mean, there might not be, but do you think that the studios at the time, whether it was, Paramount or whoever else, MGM, did they have particular kind of identities, or did they have, I suppose, different types of horror movies to the ones that Universal were making so famously?
I think they definitely did. Certainly if you look at Warner Brothers, for example, that was a studio whose slightly more mainstream films were often mired in newspapers and front-page style reporters, and they did an awful lot of gangster films as well. Well, if you look at their horror films, you have some with wisecracking reporters desperate to get the next scoop. If you look to Dr. X and Mystery of the Wax Museum in particular.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at RKO, they didn't really become a horror factory until the 1940s, when they got involved with producer Val Lewton. But in the 1930s, they did produce two notable horror films, which were also jungle adventures. So I suppose you could say that's their identity. They did The Most Dangerous Game, and that, of course, built up to King Kong, which shares sets with The Most Dangerous Game. MGM... I mean, this is where trying to assign a particular identity to a studio's horror product falls apart a bit, because with MGM, the through line just seemed to be trying to outdo all the other studios.
Right, yeah.
They put forth all these really, really bad taste efforts to out-horror every other horror film in town. So MGM did The Mask of Fu Manchu, which upset everyone because it's so racist. They did Freaks, which upset everyone because it's so ableist. And eventually they did Mad Love, which is so perverse. It's so frothing with sadism and masochism that it became one of the reasons Hollywood ceased producing any kind of horror film for a few years. Now, if we come to Universal and Paramount, the studios behind Murders in the Rue Morgue and Island of Lost Souls, I think you definitely can see a house style emerging. It's very easy to spot with Universal, because we know full well that their particular style became, I suppose, an Americanized take on German expressionism. And I suppose if you really boil down their identity, they're the home of the monsters, aren't they?
Yeah.
It was an extraordinarily fertile period for them, and, they did, in a period of just 5 years, Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Bride of Frankenstein, The Werewolf of London.
Yeah.
monster after monster, Dracula's daughter, just a galaxy of monsters. And if you look to other studios' horror films, they didn't tend to do monsters all that often.
Right.
You have some important exceptions, but Universal pretty well cornered the market where monsters were concerned. Now, Paramount were a bit like MGM in that they really went for broke in making their horror films extreme and graphic.
Yes.
But they seem to get away with it rather more than MGM. So, you were discussing last week, I think, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Fantastic Ruben Mamoulian version from 1931. It's very extreme. It's very graphic.
It's shocking, that film.
Yeah. Even today. I love it so much. I think after the James Whale horror films, it's my favourite of the 1930s.
Yeah, agreed.
But that is a film that did very well critically, very well commercially, and even got an Oscar.
Yeah.
And certainly the year after Island of Lost Souls, Paramount put out Murders in the Zoo.
Right, yeah.
Which opens with one of the most shocking sequences in any film of that vintage, which is where Lionel Atwill is merrily stitching shut the mouth of a romantic rival.
Oh, wow, yes.
Then lurches forward into a scream-filling close-up, and you see everything. It's unbelievable that they got away with it.
It is amazing. I wonder why they get away with it more than MGM. That's interesting.
Well, they did with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I think because they could say, oh, well, it's an adaptation of a great literary classic.
Of course, yeah.
And it's also a costume picture. It's a period film. I think these are all points in its favour. And I think because of its history with actors like John Barrymore.
Yes.
And even further back, Richard Mansfield essaying the dual role. It was also seen as a great acting showcase.
Yes.
So it had all these other distractions to convince people they hadn't just been to a prurient horror show. Murders in the Zoo did incite a bit more backlash. And Island of Lost Souls was the one that really blew up in Paramount's face, as I'm sure we'll get on to discussing very, very shortly.
Yes. It's really, I think that's really interesting. It's nice to kind of just kind of look at that before we get into these two particular films, I think. So, let's begin. We are going to go back to talking about a Universal movie, first of all. So, Murders in the Rue Morgue from 1932. What a strange little movie this is, James.
That's putting it mildly, Mike. I don't know whether I should apologise for having suggested this as the double the double for Island of Lost Souls. They do go together well, but...
They do. I think it was a great double bill, but what an odd little film.
Is a hot mess the phrase that the youth of today would use to describe?
I think
I don't know if I would. It's more of a lukewarm mess to me, but a fascinating misstep and a fascinating misfire.
I love that. Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on it. First of all, James, just set the scene for us. Give us a little plot synopsis of Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Dr. Miracle leads a double life. To the world outside, he's a flamboyant carnival showman, shocking the paying public with deranged speeches on evolution and glimpses of his caged ape, who he's called Eric. Behind closed doors, however, Miracle is kidnapping women and attempting to mix their blood with that of Eric the ape, and perhaps do something even nastier. And until he finds the perfect match, who'll carry on committing these murders in the Rue Morgue.
Lovely. So, James, you've kind of hinted upon it there already, but what do you think of this film? How does it kind of compare to the sort of other films coming out at this time, like some of the ones you've just mentioned from Universal and other studios?
I don't want to be too cruel to it. I will say straight away, it is probably the weakest of all of the Universal horror films released in the 1930s. But in its defence, it was only the third film in the Universal horror cycle. Its principal photography finished just as Frankenstein was released. And I think Frankenstein caused such a sensation that it immediately made Universal panic that Murders in the Rue Morgue was not going to stack up to Frankenstein. Now, we can see all three of those initial Universal horror films as essentially one-offs. You had Dracula, then you had Frankenstein, then you had Murders in the Rue Morgue. And I think we have to regard them all as one-offs because they're all too early on in the cycle for the formula to have been established.
Yes.
No one was to know whilst filming Murders in the Rue Morgue that Frankenstein would be the enormous hit, far in excess of Dracula, that it became, and would really set the template for everything going forward. Now, there's an additional fascinating wrinkle in all this, a very big wrinkle, in that both director Robert Florey and star Bela Lugosi were originally assigned to do Frankenstein, even to the point of shooting a test.
Yeah.
And then James Whale inherited the project, brought Boris Karloff on board to play the monster. Cinema history was created.
Yes.
Robert Florey and Bela Lugosi were shuffled over to Murders in the Rue Morgue, and history wasn't created.
Yes.
I mean, this film, it really only occurred to me rewatching it for this podcast, but it's an extremely backward-looking film because it's a period-set horror film.
Yes.
It's easy to overlook, but Universal so rarely did period-set horror films. Murders in the Rue Morgue, therefore, feels rather more like the silent near-horror films that Universal was making in the 1920s. I say near-horror because that, of course, was horror before horror was a recognised genre.
Right, yeah.
So it's particularly like The Man Who Laughs.
Yes.
Especially in how stylistically adventurous it is.
Yes.
But, yeah, it's a throwback in that sense. I think it's a throwback in having the ape as a villain. That rather makes me think of 1920s Broadway hits like The Gorilla, part of that old dark house vein of stage mysteries. And it's also very backward-looking in using The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as a template.
Yes.
I mean, Caligari, of course, when it was released, it was, I suppose, quite futuristic in terms of, predicting the stylistic possibilities of film. And, even the fact that filmmakers today are still using Caligari as a reference. But it doesn't mate particularly well with the Universal horror formula. What are your thoughts on this film?
Well, I will say it looks beautiful. That was
does, yeah.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that struck me. And then beyond that, I don't know. It didn't hang together particularly well for me. It's kind of 60 minutes in length. And within that 60 minutes, it kind of veers from sort of wacky comedy to scenes of torture to themes of bestiality to kind of clunky performances and dialogue. Yeah. So it's this kind of really queasy mix, and it wasn't not compelling, it wasn't boring, it was gorgeous to look at, but I also wasn't quite sure what I was watching for a lot of the time.
I love that you've used the word queasy there, because I think that perfectly sums it up. Yeah. Because it does leave rather a bad taste, but not just because of the horror sequences. A lot of the supposedly normal characters in this make you feel a bit ill because of the way they're acted and dressed and the way they behave, and there's just something compellingly off-kilter about this film. And I have to say it gets more and more fascinating with repeat viewings. I mean, it's an underdog film,
right?
I think we do have to say that. So it was the consolation prize when Robert Florey and Bela Lugosi couldn't do Frankenstein. A story that does, in no matter whose hands, have infinitely greater dramatic and horror possibilities than any version of Murders in the Rue Morgue, I'd say.
Right, yeah.
It had a much lower budget than Frankenstein. So Frankenstein's budget, it went over budget, but it eventually came to just over $290,000.
Right.
When Murders in the Rue Morgue was put into production, the budget was set at $90,000.
Wow, yeah.
Now, it expanded, partly through retakes, because Universal got afraid it wasn't as good as Frankenstein.
That's right.
Put a lot of money into trying to bring it up to that level. So the eventual budget was around $190,000, but that's still, only about 2/3 of what it cost Universal to make Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. And it was additionally sabotaged by Universal doing a panicked 11th hour re-edit of lots of scenes, so it doesn't flow particularly well.
No.
And there are fan edits that have been done where, the scenes do go together a bit more, and
that's interesting.
A bit more sense is made of all of its disparate scenes and elements. And it's also a film that had, I believe, imposed on it by Universal its leading lady Sydney Fox, of whom we will say more anon. But she doesn't do this film any great favours and commits the besetting sin of being first billed in what was supposedly Bela Lugosi's big horror follow-up star vehicle to Dracula.
That's interesting.
So this film is handicapped at every turn, and considering all of that, it's watchable.
It is watchable.
You put it on, and an hour later it finishes. Yes. And you have survived.
It's shorter
I'm being a bit unfair, but I do have affection for this film, but I cannot deny it is desperately flawed.
There is stuff about it, though, that is really interesting, I think, absolutely. And I do love that it's shorter than most episodes of Netflix TV shows these days, So
that did not pass me by with my enduring hatred of anything over 70 minutes.
Yes, exactly. God, I wonder what it looked like before they shot all the additional material, after Frankenstein came out. I would love to know what cut looked like,
Well, they seem to do quite a bit of damage to the film with some of the decisions they made in the reshoots, because I believe that was when they went to the zoo and got all of the close-ups of a real ape. So every time we see Eric the ape in close-up, it's a real ape, and it's done so ham-fistedly. You can tell it's simply not the same creature you're looking at as you see in the wider shots.
Yes.
They bear no resemblance to each other. So Universal apparently thought that was a good idea, and I think weakened the film. It seems a lot of what they did in the reshoots was focusing on the climax, which is a chase with the monkey and the leading lady over the rooftops of Paris.
Yes.
I suppose possibly they were giving that more attention because I think Murders in the Rue Morgue, for all its flaws, it has a lot of quite strong scenes at the start.
It does.
It dips off in the middle.
Yeah.
And they probably wanted to have a really horrific, really memorable action conclusion. Not dissimilar to the horrific action conclusion of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Which is similarly a monster making off with a human being, and that human being being rescued by a mob.
Of course. Yeah. So obviously this is based on Edgar Allan Poe, 1941 short story Murders in the Rue Morgue as well.
Yes.
We talked before, I was reminded of, we discussed The Raven together, didn't we, a couple of years back?
Oh, so we did.
What a fun film that was, right?
Yeah,
and very, 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 very loosely based on the work of Edgar Allan Poe. What about this one? How faithful, I suppose, is it an adaptation of Poe's story?
Well, it simply isn't.
Yes.
I mean, the reason Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue has an important place in literary history is because it's often regarded as the first modern detective story. He did a few which had Pierre Dupin as a kind of proto-Sherlock Holmes figure. With The Murders in the Rue Morgue being a detective story, it's also a mystery story.
Yeah.
But it has to be said, looking at the 1932 film Murders in the Rue Morgue, there's no mystery there at all.
No.
Lugosi is plainly the evildoer from the second we lay eyes on him.
Yes.
So Universal completely dispensed with any idea that their version of Murders in the Rue Morgue was going to be a mystery story. The main things that come from Poe are one big horror set piece, which is the woman being stuffed up the chimney,
yes.
and one big supposedly comedy set piece, which is all of the neighbours squabbling over what language the murderer was speaking when they heard him behind the closed door.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of it, really. And very importantly to, especially this series of your podcast that you're doing now, the original Poe story, it doesn't have any mad science element.
Right.
And it certainly doesn't have a mad doctor. There's no Dr. Miracle equivalent.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Every time Universal did an Edgar Allan Poe film in the 1930s, they added a mad doctor. And a mad doctor in every case played by Bela Lugosi. So they've ended in 1934 The Black Cat, which has Lugosi as Dr. Vitas Verdegast, who starts off almost sane and then has devolved into skinning Boris Karloff alive by the end of the film. And then in 1935 they did The Raven with Lugosi as Dr. Richard Volin, and he's dangerously mad there and trying to destroy people with torture devices derived from Poe's stories.
Yeah.
So that seemed to be as close as Universal had to an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation formula in the 1930s. Let's throw out the story, stick Bela Lugosi in as a mad doctor. This was the film that kicked it off.
Well, I love it. Well, you mentioned already the kind of this idea that this film seems to be kind of looking back. How do you find just generally Robert Florey's direction here and the visuals? Because again, like you said, it clearly is very obviously kind of harking back, isn't it, to German Expressionism, Caligari, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a kind of halfway house between the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and the then developing Universal house style, I think. And it is one of this film's saving graces. It's almost always visually striking. Yeah, there are all sorts of incredibly striking instances in this film of set design and shadows. Lugosi even meets his death through shadow play in this film. So he was brutalised by Eric the Ape. And there are all these stories that the Universal production design team followed very precisely in the footsteps of Caligari by painting shadows directly onto the sets when they couldn't get the effects they wanted with the lighting. And you've got some truly astonishing instances of moving camera in this film. Robert Florey had Carl Freund as cinematographer here. He'd also been cinematographer on Dracula, where he seemed to have been rather held down. I think because Todd Browning wasn't a very hands-on, ambitious director on that film for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But Freund, of course, had come up through the German Expressionist cinema. You know, he'd been cinematographer on The Golem and, you know, a film as ridiculously lavish as Metropolis, for God's sake. I mean, going from Metropolis and then 5 years later doing something as much of a curio as Murders in the Rue Morgue. It's quite a change, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Thanks to Freud, you have some really astonishing moments of moving camera in Murders in the Rue Morgue. There's always a shot that really leaps out for me where the camera starts off fixed on Lugosi, who's staring up with malign intent towards a balcony, and then the camera sweeps past Lugosi, up, all the way to the balcony where the insipid lovers are holding each other and whispering sweet nothings. Stays fixed there for a while, and then it sweeps all the way back down to Lugosi down in the street. And it's realised, you know, incredibly beautifully. However, the moving camera is also a bit of a problem in this film, in that it frequently topples over into look at me territory.
Right.
It becomes style for style's sake, and when there isn't a great deal of substance in the film, that does become a problem.
Yeah.
It becomes something of a distraction.
I
mean, Ruben Mamoulian's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that does also delve into look at me territory to some extent. There are some very tricksy moments with the moving camera, and you do start to think this could get out of hand. You know,
definitely. It definitely calls attention to itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's not modest and integrated with the subject in the way of the cinematography of something like Frankenstein.
Right. Yeah.
But Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde ultimately gets away with it because there's dramatic meat there.
Yes.
In Murders in the Rue Morgue, it does become distracting. It does feel a bit pointless. And never more so than in that picnic sequence where Camille is on a swing and the camera is moving with the swing. And I have to say, that's a shot that gives me mild vertigo, even watching at home on a relatively small TV. I have no idea how it must have played in the cinema, because it just goes on forever as well.
It does.
It's so distracting. It takes you out of the film so much, particularly because nothing of real substance is going on at that point.
Yes.
I mean, I'd argue everything with the young lovers goes for nothing in this film anyway. You just have Camille banging on about the new bonnet she has and getting Pierre to guess where she got it from. And frankly, no one cares about any of this stuff. And essentially, I think Robert Florey, the director, is confessing that he doesn't care. He's confessing he's bored, and he's trying to keep interest alive by doing things with the camera he has no business doing. It is very technically impressive. but it doesn't really serve a purpose, does it?
I completely agree with you. I feel that way about a lot of movies, even very modern films, ones that kind of very much call attention to their own camera work. I find quite jarring a lot of the time, actually. I would agree with that. I think when it's at its best is when it's just using those beautiful sort of German expressionist visuals, and I did find it very striking to look at in that regard. And you're right, maybe it's making some of the less interesting scenes more interesting. Maybe that was the intention.
If it keeps me awake, even to the point of inducing motion sickness, who am I to complain with Murders in the Rue Morgue?
Well, exactly. Of course, there is Bela Lugosi to enjoy in this movie, right? Let's talk a little bit about him, his mad doctor character of Dr. Miracle. What do you think of this character, and what do you think of Bela's performance here in comparison to Dracula 1 year earlier?
Well, it's his first big horror showcase after Dracula.
Yeah.
And it really is very poignant in retrospect, knowing all we know about the direction Lugosi's career would go in. Murders in the Rue Morgue preserves a very fleeting, very singular moment, because this was really the only time when Bela Lugosi was Hollywood's #1 horror star.
Right.
And then the moment principal photography finished on Murders in the Rue Morgue, Frankenstein is shown, and everything shifts over to Karloff for the rest of Lugosi's career.
Yeah.
There was no rivalry between Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff except in the mind of Bela Lugosi.
Right.
Karloff would always have the bigger salaries, the better agents, the better films in which to star, better billing when they appeared together, and on and on and on. So Lugosi was never bigger than when he was making Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Right.
Obviously, when he did Dracula, he wasn't a film star. He was doing his scenes for Murders in the Rue Morgue. So I revere it for that.
Yeah.
And I deplore Universal for never showing Lugosi the proper respect. They released Murders in the Rue Morgue, and it underperformed, and they didn't renew Bela Lugosi's contract. They did renew Boris Karloff's contract in the wake of Frankenstein. And thereafter, Universal only really gave Lugosi good parts when he was in a film with Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
You think of The Black Cat, you think of The Raven, you think of Son of Frankenstein.
Right, yeah.
All films in which Karloff had bigger salaries and better billing than Lugosi.
Yeah.
And actually, it is deplorable that Lugosi is given second billing in Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
He is the great reason to watch this film now.
I think so, yeah.
And he is in tune with it insofar as he has bags and bags of style. But he also anchors it a bit in that he does back this film up with substance. Now, it's not a substance that's particularly in the screenplay or the character as written, but the substance comes from Lugosi's belief in what he's doing. Everything he does in this film, he brings to it 100% commitment.
Yeah.
Untold energy and passion, and the thing I like especially about his performance as Dr. Miracle, musicality. He sings this role, to the point where he doesn't always make sense. And these were the days when Lugosi was most ill at ease with the English language.
Yeah.
So, not being at ease with the language, he converts so many of his lines into music. He may as well be singing in a grand opera or speaking in a different language.
What a funny-looking man. He's a showing himself.
Did you notice his accent? I wonder where he comes from. I never heard an accent like that.
Silence! I'm Dr. Miracle, Monsieur, Madame, and I'm not a sideshow charlatan. So if you expect to witness the usual carnival, hocus-pocus, just go to the box office and get your money back.
Well, I've got to say, I wish I had a slightly better print of this to watch, because the version on Prime, the sound wasn't great. And with the combination of the muffled sound and the way in which Bela delivers some of his lines, I was like, what on earth is he saying? And there were no closed captions options available as well.
Incomprehensible.
So. Yes.
Yeah. I would say, though, in Lugosi's defence, that this applies to a lot of the quote-unquote normal people in the film as well.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
There was the scene when she's singing on the balcony towards those other people down below. I was like, I have no idea what they're singing or what they're saying to each other.
Frankly, Mike, you have no idea what she's singing or saying. I don't think you wanted to hear what she was singing or saying.
No.
It's Sidney Fox as Camille.
Oh,
God bless her.
Exactly. But let's go back to talking about this character of Dr. Miracle. I mean, especially in the context of this kind of, man-made monsters and mad science kind of season that we're doing at the moment. What do you make of him? This kind of really dark character in a lot of ways, right? As you mentioned at the beginning, this is a film that explores bestiality. Such a taboo, right? And his plan of, well, what is his plan? He's kind of kidnapping women and he's injecting them with animals' blood in order to make some sort of half-human, half-ape type creature, I guess, or have an ape mate with a woman so that they can have a child. It's a bit unclear, right? But I guess there are these kind of Darwinian ideas of, man comes from ape and therefore let's kind of explore the crossover of those two species, I suppose. But what do you make of him as a character here?
I think what puts Miracle over the top is the ickiness of what he's engaged in trying to do. It feels desperately unclean and desperately sordid, and it's, of course, harnessing all of his Darwinian anxieties and also just confronting what still rightly remains such a taboo subject, which is bestiality.
Yes.
We're all a bit circumspect about animal cruelty when it comes to eating meat, aren't we? But I think whether people eat meat or not, everyone is in agreement that bestiality is a fiend beyond description in terms of animal cruelty.
Yes.
So Dr. Miracle certainly has the ick factor. That said, the nature of his mad science is bafflingly unclear, isn't it?
Well, completely, yeah.
What's he actually trying to do, and how is this mating, which he's constantly hinting at, actually supposed to happen? I think Universal had gone a bit too far here and didn't quite know how to execute such a perverse idea on screen. Because most of what we see of Dr. Miracle's mad science is him wielding a syringe in order to extract blood and analyse it and see whether it's a good fit for mingling with Eric's blood. Well, this mingling of blood, this mingling of fluids, that comes to seem a metaphor for the actual sex between women and ape that can't be directly broached, directly described. And in particular, that syringe is a very potent symbol, isn't it? I mean, it is a phallic symbol. It's really savagely horrible, actually, when you start to think about the implications. I think one of the interesting things about Dr. Miracle, anyway, is he seems extremely literal-minded in how he's addressing all of his Darwinian areas. I mean, it's still often a thing you'll get maddeningly fundamentalist religious types saying and kind of parroting, sort of saying, oh, well, evolution can't be real. You're trying to say monkey just gave birth to a person one.
Right.
Which obviously is, I mean, a 3-year-old would have a better grasp of evolution than some of these people who spout this guff. But Lugosi's Dr. Miracle seems to be literal-minded in a similar way. Only he's really for the idea that, a monkey and a human might mate and might beget some sort of offspring. I think there's also a nice irony in this, in that the way Lugosi is made up as Dr. Miracle, it is rather funny, but he is made to look a bit like a simian throwback himself, isn't he?
Right, yeah, those mad eyebrows as well.
Oh, the mad eyebrows that join in the middle. I mean, obviously he just played Dracula, who, in the Lugosi version derived from the Broadway play, is quite a suave, quite a debonair figure.
Yeah.
But you think back to Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he describes Vera Cantu as hairy palms and does indeed have brows that meet in the middle.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's a funny little footnote, isn't it? That Lugosi, in a way, is coming a bit closer to Stoker's Dracula in his Dr. Miracle.
Yeah, I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And his this, like you say, this kind of slightly confusing mad plan to mate Eric, right, the ape, with Camille, but women in general, but also the way he uses syringes and everything. But then, in amidst all of this, that does lead to some pretty disturbing horror, doesn't it? There's a scene quite near the beginning where he kidnaps a girl and ties her up. You mentioned this to me in a mess when we were messaging about it, James. It feels kind of tantamount to sort of torture porn, doesn't it? This scene, and this is probably about 15 minutes into the film or something, and you go, oh my god, I'm in for something quite hardcore here.
Yes. You know? Oh god, yeah. And for me, being such an antiquarian, I think you frankly need to give me credit that I even knew the term torture porn.
I was very impressed. Very impressed. Yes.
Colour. It's in colour. I mean, I'm quite interested to ask you, Mike, because I'm not very expert or very well versed in torture porn, despite having subjected myself to Martyrs a few months ago.
Oh God. Well, you've watched the ultimate one then, really.
But of course, the striking thing with Martyrs is it has so much in the way of ideas. And
yes.
I think so much of that film's horrifying impact is it really justifies the brutality and the nastiness visited on the human form in terms of, as I say, the ideas it puts across. What's your opinion on torture porn more generally? Because I mean, there are certainly divisive figures like Eli Roth, and I'm given to understand that one of the criticisms of Roth is very often the films just seem nasty for the sake of being nasty and don't have coherent ideas backing them up. So it would seem. Yeah, I wonder if Murders in the Rue Morgue is kind of predicting that, because, of course, it's a very flimsy film, and as you say, it feels very queasy, and I think this is another element that does make it queasy. It has such nastiness so early on, and
God. Yeah.
Because the vehicle is so flimsy, the nastiness is sort of, I don't know, it's kind of cast in an even starker, sharper relief, isn't it?
I think that's right. Yeah, and you're right. You know, I think it's less the sort of new French extremity movement like Martyrs that is associated with torture porn, because those are kind of exploring something bigger and more existential and more emotional. Yeah. Whereas, yes, Eli Roth's films, for example, the Hostel films, they are much more of a. I mean, some people argue that they are about kind of xenophobia and you know, America's kind of relationship with other countries at the time in the mid 2000s. But really, it does feel like an excuse to see people get, you know, chunks of them cut off, right, in gory detail, and you know, that has its value in horror too. Of course, you know, I had a really long, interesting conversation with Dan Martin about the Human Centipede 2, right, which of course is known as one of the most notorious, shocking, extreme kind of body horror torture porn movies ever. And you know, Dan kind of argued, well, that's the point of that. You know, you're watching it to see, you know, how far can cinema go? How far can this filmmaker take me, I suppose, you know? So, you know, I think in some ways there are kind of interesting intellectual merits or pursuits in watching those sorts of films. But yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it does feel... You're right. I think maybe because the story surrounding this is slightly flimsier or something, it does feel kind of shocking and jarring when we get to this scene in this moment. But also... very effective, like genuinely quite effective and disturbing. You know, I think that was a genuinely, and God, I felt this even more with Island of Lost Souls, which we'll get to later. But genuinely moments of true disturbing horror here, which, you know, you don't always necessarily expect from a movie of this era. You know,
and it is of course interesting that you bring up the French there, because Robert Fleury was a Frenchman and did have experience with the Grand Guignol.
Right, well, there you go.
Which was astonishingly grisly. One of the delights of the Inside Number 9 stage show currently touring is it does a little riff on the Grand Guignol.
It does.
Without meaning to give anything away.
It does,
and there are some very gratifying Dan Martin-created special effects there. But yeah, the Grand Guignol was all about limbs being lopped off and eyes being gouged out and burnings and whippings and hangings and, you know, it's incredible how grisly those plays were.
Yeah.
And Robert Florey was cognizant with all of that, So I wonder if this torture sequence we get with the woman of the streets early on in Murders in the Rue Morgue, I partly wonder if it's coming out of that tradition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so uncharacteristically nasty for Universal in particular.
Well, I suppose there is something about that suits that kind of carnival setup too, right? That kind of link between kind of that sort of showmanship of Grand Guignol and carnivals and that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Part of the ickiness and the nastiness of Murders in the Rue Morgue is its violence against women, isn't it? And she's particularly devalued because of her profession as this euphemistically described, if we go by the credits, woman of the streets.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And I partly wonder if her profession, in again a very nasty way, partly gives the filmmakers permission to do horrible things to her.
Yeah.
Because nothing so grisly happens to Camille.
No.
Who lives in a nice house with her mother and seems very genteel and very innocent.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at how the woman of the streets is treated here, and certainly how Ivy is treated in Mamoulian's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's incredibly sadistic. And certainly when Lugosi's Miracle is railing against her for having rotten blood, I think we can surmise that's a suggestion she has venereal disease.
Right.
Again, because of what she does for a living. Yeah, there are other things as well. I mean, the censors asked Universal to tone down her screams in this scene.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And actually, even in this scene as it plays out, the screams are pretty wall-to-wall. I think maybe they exchanged a few screams for moans and just turned the volume down slightly, but she is in terrible physical pain throughout. So
yes.
Be patient. Are you in pain, mademoiselle? It will only last a little longer.
that's extremely upsetting. And I have to say as well, something that particularly disturbed me when I first saw Murders in the Rue Morgue was the way the body is disposed of. She's cut down from this strange mock crucifix in the lab.
Yeah.
The ropes are severed, and Lugosi, with his foot, activates a trapdoor, and the body, with astonishing speed, is just deposited in the river.
Yeah.
And it's just so...
It's cold, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's a bit of a jump moment, actually. It's so swift and so mercenary a way of, getting rid of that body.
Yeah, it's crazy. And this is the kind of interesting, odd thing about this film, right? Because we get this set up, this, like you say, quite a strong first act, generally, I would say, and an interesting climax, which we'll get to in a bit. But then there is also a sort of other diversions it takes. And I want to ask you about some of these other characters that we spend some time with in the middle of the film. So you've mentioned already...
I'm sorry, Mike. Were those actors in the middle of the film playing characters?
Well, exactly.
People.
I mean, this is maybe my question, you know?
Well, I think you've also slipped up in suggesting that there's loads of horror at the start of the film, when the real horror comes when we focus on these apparently normal people.
Yes,
sorry,
exactly.
What was your question?
Well, this is it. What you make of some of these other weird and wonderful characters? You've mentioned Sidney Fox already as Camille, and we've got Pierre, we've got the character of Paul, right, and a couple of others. Like, what are your thoughts on kind of these other characters and performances in the film?
Well, they're all uniformly dreadful, aren't they? And because I'm such an advocate for the 1930s horror film. It pains me to say that, and I don't think it's too likely that someone would stumble upon this, of all the films coming out in the 1930s, as the first horror film of that vintage they see. But, my terror is always that someone will watch this film and just assume, oh, well, that's just how acting was in the 1930s. It's not true! This film is unusual in how poor a lot of the acting is. It's a lot like White Zombie in that way, actually, in which you again have Lugosi stealing the film, and most of the normal characters are quite melodramatic and quite... Yes,
absolutely right, yeah.
Quite unbelievable as real people. I mean, I do have to say in defence of this cast, who on earth would be capable of speaking the dialogue they're given with conviction?
Right, yeah.
I mean, you have all of that sick-making love-making between Pierre and Camille, where Pierre's sort of saying things, oh, you're a fallen star, Camille.
Yeah.
Oh, and your hair, it's full of stardust. And then he has that particularly atrocious speech where he keeps mentioning Mayday at the end of every line. Oh, you're like the wine in Burgundy on May Day, and a song sung on May Day, and a dance done by the girls of Provence in Burgundy, May Day, May Day. You know, I'm sat there watching, going, May Day, May Day.
Yes, exactly.
The dialogue is bad.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, maybe it was intentional because Robert Florey certainly in interviews said. And again, this is derived from the Grand Guignol. There must be a balance of horror and humour when dealing with subjects of this type.
Yes.
So if I'm being as charitable as I humanly can be, maybe some of the overripe dialogue is meant to be fringed in funniness. Maybe it's meant to evoke a titter.
Yes, yeah.
But if that's the case, I don't think it's carried off with enough winking self-awareness for it to come off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Sydney Fox has to be faced.
Yes.
And she is beyond belief as Camille. And it's tragic that this is her legacy. You know, this is by far her best-known performance. Because she had been a Broadway leading lady. She did do other films.
Yeah.
Some of which I sought out in preparing for this podcast. And she is a bit better in those. But I think she's probably very much a creature of her time. I imagine there was something about her look, and she is very beautiful. There was something about her look and her acting style which was very in tune with certain sensibilities in the late 20s and the early 30s, which very quickly faded away.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and she led a very, very tragic life. She was dead at the age of 34 after an overdose of sleeping pills. We don't know if it was a suicide or, you know, if it was an accident, but yeah, and as I say, her legacy is this particular performance. And
yeah.
And I have to say, while we're talking about the other people in this film, I'm sort of okay with Pierre. I mean, he could be worse, and but God, the moment of flat out weirdness in this film comes with Pierre's roommate.
Yes.
Words fail me. I want to go up to him and do my best Holly Willoughby and say, are you okay? Because what is wrong with this man? What is his problem? And it only seems to apply to one scene where he's making this impoverished little lunch of macaroni. And he's such a whiny little bitch in this scene. And I can't think of a more highfalutin or intellectual way of putting it. He's addressing Pierre, who's absorbed in all of his scientific experimentation and research. He's addressing Pierre like a downtrodden spouse.
Yes,
yes. And he's just whining and whining. I think when we were texting back and forth, Mike, you said it was a sort of Bert and Ernie relation.
Right, that is exactly how they feel, isn't it? Yeah,
but it's only in this one scene.
The macaroni's ready. The coffee's getting cold. Aren't you going to eat your lunch? You give 5 francs to that old ghoul down at the morgue, and I have to turn magician and pull a loaf of bread out of my nose so we can eat. Dupin, you might at least have decency to come to the table. Pierre, why don't you go down to the morgue and live there, instead of making a morgue out of our home? Vampire, vulture, body snatcher, say something.
And you just have Pierre's roommate spouting off about how hard done to he is, saying, oh, well, it's all very well for you, spending all our money at the morgue. Well, I have to, bizarre line that intrudes at this point, I have to pull a loaf of bread out of my nose. What? Is this because you couldn't pull a loaf of bread out my arse at this point?
Right.
I don't know what's going on, Mike. I don't understand.
It's very odd. It's very odd.
He's detonating with hysterical frustration by scene's end, just sort of saying, "Pierre, eat your lunch."
Yeah.
Why? I don't understand. I mean, queer coding in films of this age turns up in many and various guises, but I don't understand what it's doing here. I don't understand why he's suddenly so prissy and so effeminate in that one scene. I always look forward to it because it's so eye-rollingly strange. But when that's as horrific as a scene of a woman having her blood extracted and killed on a mock crucifix and then put into the River Seine, when that's just as much a horror highlight, you're in trouble.
Right, exactly. It's a very strange thing, isn't it? And that is absolutely the point where you go, what film am I watching here? It's very odd. Yeah.
And it feels unwholesome.
Yes, yes.
Clearly it was intended as comic relief.
Absolutely.
And it is funny. But I'm sort of laughing lest I scream when it gets to things like that. And it just leaves, again, a rather bad, icky taste. Fascinating.
Well, maybe we should finish by talking about sort of the climactic kind of sequences towards the end, and particularly we should talk a little bit about Eric the Ape, shouldn't we, I suppose? Because this is predominantly, right, portrayed by a man, by Charles Gamora, I believe, right, who kind of portrays the ape. Yeah. How do you find that, the way, I guess, how successful a sort of, I don't know what we want to call it, is he the villain, the monster, as Eric the Ape, I suppose?
Well, given Universal was Hollywood's monster factory, and it was, in this 5-year period, they produced all of their great classic monsters, barring later offshoots like the Wolfman and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Given all of that, it's notable, isn't it, that we don't really get action figures of Eric the Ape.
No.
He's bless him, he's just not endured as a franchise character.
No.
I mean, even his name, Eric, is... we associate that more with the Phantom of the Opera, as played by Lon Chaney in 1925.
Yeah,
he's not even the greatest Universal monster called Eric.
Right. Yes, that's true.
People like Charles Gamora and another actor called Ray Corrigan, they played tons and tons of apes and gorillas, and they really tried to make an art out of it. But these gorilla-suited actors, they do wind up suffering much the fate that befalls creature performers nowadays in films, where they're frequently sabotaged at every turn. They get short shrift in the edit, and I just entertain the gravest of reservations as to how effective any gorilla-suited actor can be in trying to make a monstrous impression.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it's funny you mentioned King Kong, because obviously this was released a year before King Kong, but there was something a bit pre-King Kong-esque about that final sequence with the ape and the heroine on the rooftops, right, as well, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah. No, there definitely is a surface resemblance there, isn't it? It's again the ape with murkily amorous intentions, seizing hold of the heroine and making off with her. Yeah, eventually being gunned down. And falling from a great height.
Exactly.
But the thing with King Kong is it has scale, doesn't it?
It does.
We care about Fay Wray's Andaro, and we care about King Kong, even though he's represented by a little stop-motion figure. We don't care about Camille.
No.
And we don't care about Eric the Ape, because neither as a character we've been able to get on board with. And, frankly, when Eric the Ape is shot and rolls into the river, I wouldn't be particularly upset if he took Camille with him. I'm sorry, Sidney Fox. I'm compounding the tragedy by not paying her the proper respect. But, Sidney Fox wasn't paid the proper respect by what she was given to do in this film. And
well, exactly.
Charles Gamora wasn't either. I mean, by all accounts, Gamora was really upset when he saw the film and realised they'd put in all of these stupid close-ups of a real ape.
Yeah.
When he was meant to have his close-ups. Gamora, actually, has to be said. He turns up very briefly in Island of Lost Souls in his gorilla suit again.
Oh, yeah.
He's in one of the cages on board the ship, so that almost feels like a little in-joke coming after Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is in so many ways an ineffective horror film.
Right, yeah.
Having, the actor who tried to put forward Eric the Ape caged, and just a prelude to the much more effective horror films that were to come in Island of Lost Souls. And,
yeah.
Lugosi's back again in a very different part and a much more subordinate part. But
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, we should move on to Island of Lost Souls.
we should.
So,
I mean, are there closing statements to make about Murders in the Rue Morgue? I
this was. Yeah, I don't know. This was going to be my question for you, I suppose. I mean, I suppose you've sort of mentioned this already in terms of, would you recommend this movie to people? But beyond, I guess, just as a kind of, for its historical significance, I suppose, maybe not.
I just would not rush to this film early on in your Universal horror journey. I think it's one of the ones you have to hoover up last. I mean, if you're partial to Bela Lugosi, this is one of his great performances. This is Lugosi firing on all cylinders, being as flamboyant and baroque and theatrical and impassioned as you could possibly hope for. So if you're a Lugosi fan, you have to see Murders in the Rue Morgue. If you enjoy Caligari-esque stylistics and Dutch angles and shadow play, you're also probably going to get something out of Murders in the Rue Morgue. Beyond that, though, I think it's mainly valuable for showing us how fortunate we were to get the James Whale Frankenstein.
Yes.
And how fortunate we were to get a horror genre at all. Because, you know, so many promising elements are in the mix here, and yet it just doesn't quite come to the boil.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's an interesting film, and I sort of couldn't tear my eyes away from it, but sometimes I didn't really know what film I was watching. Yeah. So there you go. It's an interesting curio. Now it's time to thank our sponsor for this episode, NordVPN. This season, we are going to be talking quite a lot about the dangers and perils of technology, particularly the online world. So it feels like a perfect time to sign up to NordVPN, the best way to protect your online private data, like your bank details, your passwords, and your online identity. I get to travel a lot with my job, and I find NordVPN super useful. It's good to have on when I'm using my laptop in a public place. NordVPN protects all of my data when I'm on public Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or a library. It's also super useful when you need to access films or TV shows that are only available in other regions. So when I was in the US recently, I switched on NordVPN, switched my region to the UK, so I had a choice of accessing the Shudder back catalogue in the UK and the US. Super useful, especially when trying to find the films that we're going to be covering this season. You get premium cybersecurity for literally the price of a cup of coffee per month, and one NordVPN account can be used on 10 different devices. We are offering some exclusive discounts, so to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, head to nordvpn.com/evolutionofhorror. This link will give you 4 free extra months on a 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/evolutionofhorror, and we'll list the link in the show notes. Well, let's talk about Island of Lost Souls, because I think that's a really fascinating one to discuss.
It is.
A man has come from the sea. I will take you to him. Let you talk with him. I want to leave you alone with him, and you may talk with him about anything you please, about the world he comes from. But you must say nothing about me, nothing about the law, nothing about the House of Pain. Do you understand me?
Yes.
Then come along with me.
I've said Murders in the Rue Morgue never quite comes to the boil. Island of Lost Souls is overboiling almost throughout. You're in danger of sustaining burns if you get too close to this particular film. And I cannot for the life of me imagine how an audience in 1932 and 1933, when it was largely seen, I cannot imagine how they reacted to this.
No,
it
absolutely.
may well be the most horrific film of the 1930s.
I would say it's the most horrific one I've seen from this era. Definitely. So let's begin, James. Tell us a little bit about this movie. Give us the plot synopsis.
Having fled his native England in disgrace, Dr. Moreau has exiled himself to a South Seas island. There he receives shipments of caged animals, which he transforms into twisted human shapes through advanced surgery. But when a shipwrecked sailor arrives on the island, closely followed by his fiancée, Moreau hatches an even more perverse scheme to create new life, and thereby add 2 more lost souls to his island of lost souls.
So, you mentioned already this is this, James, in your opinion, the darkest, the scariest, the most disturbing of the 1930s, sort of particularly the kind of early 1930s horror movies, would you say?
I would definitely and unreservedly say so. This film, I think, uses freaks as a template. A very flawed template, though, in that freaks, a little like Murders in the Rue Morgue, leaves a bad taste. But in the case of freaks, it's because of its treatment of people of physical difference and people with disabilities. It's very uncomfortable in how it tries to get its horror effects, and it's ultimately a deeply confused film as to whether it wants us to sympathise with or recoil from the extraordinary people it presents as its freaks. Now, coming after Island of Lost Souls, you were to get films which are full of sadism and masochism like The Black Cat and Mad Love, but they mainly imply their nastiness. Island of Lost Souls, though, it's an unapologetic horror show. It presents all of the horrors on a plate. It's really visceral, it's really graphic. It doesn't shrink away from the full-blooded presentation of horror. And I think the word horror is desperately appropriate here. You know, this is beyond terror, this is beyond atmosphere, this is beyond evoking fear. It's full-blooded horror.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this film before, but it'd been a while, and I find this film so... Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think it is one of the best, one of the scariest, and, you know, genuinely still, you know, genuinely disturbing movies of this era. And it's brilliant. I think it's just really, really, really brilliantly made. And, you know, obviously, I love Charles Lawton. And, you know, it's... If we're comparing this film to Murders in the Rue Morgue, the mad doctors in both. Right. I mean, Dr. Miracle, he's unbridled Baylor and he's tremendous fun, but the sophistication and the subtlety and the absolute hellish depths of perversion that Charles Lawton injects into Dr. Moreau. Yeah, there's nothing really to compare with it in the cinema of the time. Yeah, completely. It's quite remarkable. So I guess we should just quickly talk about the source material for this one, as we did with Murders in the Rue Morgue as well. You know, obviously, Island of Dr. Moreau, H.G. Wells' 1896 novel. There have been other attempts to kind of adapt this story as well, right? But how do you find this particular... I guess, adaptation in comparison to its source material?
Well, I would say this is the definitive screen adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yes.
Which is really great for Paramount at this time, because, you know, they just produced what I think is still the definitive screen adaptation of another late 19th century mad scientist classic, which, of course, was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's very faithful to the book in terms of its unrelenting horror.
Yeah.
And it's an odd little detail that H.G. Wells, the author of The Island of Dr. Moreau, was still very much alive at this point, saw Island of Lost Souls and absolutely disowned it. He was knocked sideways by how horrific it was, and, you know, gave numerous very candid press interviews. Total PR disaster, saying how awful and how repulsive he thought this film was. And he was delighted when it was subsequently banned in the UK. Yeah. Now, I wonder quite why Wells had this reaction, and I wonder if it's because the controversy caused by Island of Lost Souls, I wonder if that provoked painful memories for Wells about the moral outrage that greeted the publication of The Island of Dr. Moreau when it appeared in 1896. Because if you look at reviews of Island of Lost Souls and much further back for reviews of The Island of Dr. Moreau, they're both of them being denounced like video nasties.
Right, yeah.
So my theory is Wells Wells himself was a bit disturbed by what he'd produced there and was trying to create some distance between himself and his hideous progeny. Wells certainly tried to say The Island of Dr. Moreau was more of a satire after the fact.
Right.
He tried to cast it in the mould of something like Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, which I think is a bit disingenuous, but it is true to say that, you know, the essential premise, it boils down to the same thing: a traveller going off to an unknown mysterious island and discovering the strange life forms that exist there, and, you know, how society is there constituted. And yeah, there is a lot of potent body horror in Wells's novel, especially the scenes dealing with vivisection.
Yeah.
But what's new in Island of Lost Souls is the sexuality. Mm-hmm. The novel is pretty much sex-free.
Right.
Whereas this film, it has, of course, the Panther Woman and the idea of bestiality, and yeah, lording over it all is Charles Laughton's Dr. Moreau, who is played so lasciviously and instigates separate schemes where he's sexually victimising first the hero and then the heroine in horrible, horrible ways.
Yeah, it is deeply disturbing stuff, isn't it? So, Earl C. Kenton's direction. You know, we talked a little bit about Rue Morgue's kind of direction and visuals. This feels so different visually, stylistically, doesn't it? How do you find his direction and the way in which he kind of brings this story to the screen?
I mean, this film is not visually ostentatious in the way of Murders in the Rue Morgue. It's very, very carefully controlled, and I think it has a quiet intensity and a quiet power in terms of its cinematography and lighting and production design.
Yes.
Island of Lost Souls has a near documentary feel to it. It's more like a newsreel at times than a traditional Hollywood horror film. It's kind of insinuating in how it slowly envelops the viewer, I think. It all kicks off, of course, with those very foggy, I believe actually location shot scenes on the ships. And that's when we start to get immersed in the textures of this film. I think the word texture is key to Island of Lost Souls. You're being drawn deeper and deeper into, first, all of this fog surrounding the boats, and then you go to the island and it feels really shadowy and really steamy and kind of tainting in a way that the jungles you get in RKO films, like The Most Dangerous Game and King Kong, I mean, they simply don't feel toxic and dangerous in the same way.
No.
You know, the jungles in those films, they're like cathedrals of trees. They're like fantastical fairy tale grottos and caverns formed out of trees, which all links into them being inspired by the illustrations of Gustave Doré. Island of Lost Souls, though, you're outside and yet it feels desperately claustrophobic, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And very, very convincing as well, I have to say. I never quite feel we're in a studio, though, of course, we are.
Yeah.
We're in those jungle sets, and they also feel really authentically tropical.
Yeah.
Which is very amusing, given that behind-the-scenes accounts tell us that those jungle sets were actually extraordinarily cold, and the actors were huddling in scarves and coats between takes. So yeah, you have all of the texture of going deeper and deeper into the jungle, and then you have the darkness of this film.
Yeah.
I think the darkness is really significant. There's a very evocative line at one point from Dr. Moreau where he says there's no twilight in the tropics, and that the night falls like a curtain. And that just adds to the sense of being entrapped and, you know, the claustrophobia of this setting. And I think the utmost texture, the centre of all of these textures that draw you further and further in, it's bound up with the beast men themselves and all the hairiness, all the matted, tufted, dark bodies of the beast men. And Charles Laughton actually was having nightmares about hair through production of this film. Yeah, he said he was dreaming about hair, and he thought there was even hair in his food when he had meals.
Oh, God.
His wife, Elsa Lanchester, said he never again went to a zoo in his life.
Oh,
it was just too much.
Oh, I love
He
that.
had too much Island of Lost Souls linked PTSD, and I think we get tainted with a bit of that in watching this film. Texture after texture after texture that draws us into the heart of darkness. It's so effective, but it's done so subtly as compared to something in your face like Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. It's kind of quietly disturbing and grotesque, isn't it? And you're right, there's a kind of there's a sort of tactility to it as well.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Charles Laughton then as Dr. Moreau. How... Again, I guess we could compare this performance to Bela Lugosi as our other mad doctor of this double bill, but how do you find Charles Laughton's performance here as Dr. Moreau?
Well, I think what we're getting with Laughton's Dr. Moreau, first of all, I think it's hinting at the greatness to come with regards to Charles Laughton and horror. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Laughton delivered arguably the greatest horror performance of all time with his Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It is up there with Karloff's Frankenstein monster, in my opinion. And he was to direct arguably the greatest horror film of all time with The Night of the Hunter.
Yeah.
But Island of Lost Souls isn't too far behind either of those achievements in my mind. And I think it's very important in terms of Laughton as a film actor in general, because I think there's a case to be made that this is Charles Laughton's first really mature film performance. It was still very early on in his film career.
Right, yeah.
He'd also done some sterling prior horror work in The Old Dark House, which was his great film debut.
Yes.
Which he plays Sir William Porterhouse. And he's great fun there, and he really lightens up the film. But he's not playing a horror character. He's in a horror film, but he's a bit of relief, really. And it's quite a theatrical, quite a broad performance he gives, and very, very well. Laughton had also done a film called Payment Deferred, which is very underseen, but I think very grottily effective. It's a kind of 1930s version of 10 Rillington Place. But that was an adaptation of a play in which Laughton had had a great success, first in the West End and then on Broadway, and had been one of the reasons he'd been brought to Hollywood. And the performance he gives... It's remarkable, but it's very much a theatre performance that's been shunted in front of a camera. With Island of Lost Souls, though, we really start to get an insight into why Laughton, in his day, was considered as dangerous and as exciting a film actor as Marlon Brando would be a few decades later. I mean, it's not for nothing that Daniel Day-Lewis still cites Laughton as one of his absolute inspirations as an actor. Laughton was essentially at the same game back in the early 1930s that Daniel Day-Lewis is at nowadays whenever he decides to come out of his retirement.
Yes.
Now, we've already discussed Murders in the Rue Morgue, and I think we've agreed that Dr. Miracle's experiments there, they don't really seem to have a point.
Right, yeah.
I think that's just as much true of Dr. Moreau's far more successful experiments in this film. There's not really a point to it. Except, I think, that Dr. Moreau, as played by Charles Laughton, is really getting off on this.
Yeah.
He's as desperately sexually sick and kinky a character as I think Laughton ever played. There's something very evocative, I think, in that white suit, that spotless white ensemble that Laughton sports in this film, and how he's ensconced at the centre of the island in this prison-like house, which is again quite white and quite light in terms of its furnishings. I think this speaks to a great repression, a very held quality in the character. And the fact that he's indulging all of his depraved sexual fantasies at a slight remove.
Right, yeah.
And those fantasies, they play out in many and various forms. I mean, you know, the Marquis de Sade pales in significance as compared to Dr. Moreau.
Yeah.
You know, you have masochism all over the place. You have bestiality again. You have voyeurism, you have torture. There's quite a bit of queer coding in Moreau as well, which I think is interesting. The idea that in the 1930s, the implication that a character was gay, there are all these associations with a kind of sexual unhealthiness or a sexual danger, a sexual threat. And for Lawton, as a gay man himself, terrified of that being made public, this was something that pushed his buttons. And that masochism, that core masochism that Moreau has in terms of his sexual fantasies. Masochism held him by a repression.
Right.
And I think this links to another of Lawton's great fascinations, which was ugliness. I don't think Charles Lawton was actually an ugly man, but he always thought of himself as being quite an ugly man. And he's definitely ugly in terms of the characters he portrays and the depths of perversity they plumb. So, with Moreau, you have presented a character who is just bristling with sexuality, but who is very held, very repressed. And you get the sense, it's only hinted at, but you get the sense that this is because he is far from a physically perfect specimen himself, and he in some way feels inadequate. He's creating all of these very virile beast men, these desperately sexual creatures. But he himself is removed from that and apart from that. He can be voyeuristic, but he's always at a slight remove from that. Until you get to the climax of this film, which I'm sure we will discuss, where he's brought to this nightmarish sexual consummation.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's... this is the genius of Lawton, though, and, you compare the work he's doing as compared to poor old Bela Lugosi's Miracle, and it is light years ahead in terms of conception and execution.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Moreau in comparison to Miracle then, because, there are similarities, as you've mentioned. This idea of this mad doctor kind of blending blood with, between human and animal and kind of experimenting and torturing in order to kind of, I don't know, enhance evolution or experiment with the idea of evolution and man's relationship with animals, with beasts, of course. And so the result of which is you've got all of these poor, tortured kind of animal humanoid experiment things all over the island. What do you think of those, the creatures, I suppose, that we are introduced to in the island and the makeup effects?
It's astonishingly effective. It's exceptionally well done.
Yeah.
And I have to say, just logistically, a huge achievement for the makeup team headed up by Wally Westmore, because we're still in the pre-Wizard of Oz days, and the Wizard of Oz was such a game changer in terms of prefabricated appliances and modern materials being used in putting makeups on an enormous cast. So when Island of Lost Souls was made, things must have been fabricated pretty much from scratch on the day, and you have so many monsters in this film. It puts Kenton's later House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula to shame in terms of how many monsters are on screen. They're not cuddly, the Beastmen.
No, they're not.
They're not franchise characters like the Mummy or the Wolfman.
No.
I said earlier that Eric the Ape has never received an action figure. Well, obviously the Beastmen in Island of Lost Souls, they haven't received action figures either, but for very different reasons, because they're too viscerally frightening.
Yeah.
I suppose to go back to Murders in the Rue Morgue, there we have Eric the Ape being fatally overexposed with those undercutting close-ups of a real ape. We don't get many close-ups of the Beastmen, but what we do see is rivetingly horrid.
Yeah.
And it's all woven together with these other truly horrible moments in the film, isn't it? It's horrid details. The scene of vivisection is so vile.
Oh my God.
It's just a torture scene.
It is. It's another torture scene. Again, that kind of those moans and screams, and again the sort of
moaning away on the table and.
What's that?
The house of pain.
Nothing.
Nothing. Somebody's being tortured. Get out! Get out!
There's also another detail which I always forget until I return to this film, which is the suggestion of slave labour.
Yeah.
It's quite a throwaway moment, actually. Moreau points through a window saying, these are some of my less successful creations. And they're all toiling away on a treadmill, creating power, so he can inflict more horrifying experiments on more hapless animals.
Yeah.
It's another detail that to me recalls White Zombie, where, of course, you have Bela Lugosi's zombie master putting all of his zombies into service in his mill. Slave labour.
Yes.
The Beastmen are utterly horrifying. And it sounds like you agree with me.
Oh, God, completely. And I think you're right, the way in which they sort of like... I don't know, they sort of emerge from the shadows and that kind of thing as well. I think it's really kind of creepily handled, I would say, in the direction as well. And then, of course, in the midst of them, you've got Bela Lugosi, right, as well, which I definitely did not realise the first time I watched this.
Oh, didn't you?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, how do you find him in this? And I wonder how would he have found this, being a... such a kind of supporting player in this particular film, I wonder,
I found it impossible not to feel rather sorry for him here.
Yeah.
And I wonder quite why he's wound up in Island of Lost Souls in the way he has.
Yeah.
Because I partly wonder, is he trying to prove a point here? He'd been notoriously sniffy about the idea of playing the Frankenstein monster because he didn't want his great handsomeness to be covered up in monster makeup.
Right.
And now... only a year later, he's embracing such a heavy monster makeup that you didn't even recognise him when you initially saw the film.
Yeah.
I mean, possibly Lugosi didn't want the makeup to be that heavy. There's a photograph that exists of a test makeup done on Lugosi where you can still tell it's Lugosi. But ultimately, they just totally smothered him in hair. But I think the more likely explanation for why he accepted this role, Mike, is... even at this relatively early stage, he had been reduced to taking absolutely anything that was offered.
Right, yeah.
Lugosi was not a good businessman. He spent money like water. He wasn't he was quite generous with his money. He was quite charitable, and he was a great bon viveur. He put on parties for other members of the Hungarian colony in Hollywood. So he certainly wasn't a miser. He'd have done himself a credit had he been a miser. But this was around the time he filed for bankruptcy. It's astonishing how quickly everything went wrong for him. He didn't have great business sense. He'd done Dracula for, I think, only $500 a week because he was so desperate to get the part. In the wake of Dracula, he'd done White Zombie for a pitifully small fee.
Right.
When you consider how much money that film made. And then he's here in Island of Lost Souls in a very subordinate role. And he was probably there on set looking enviously at the role Charles Aughton was playing, saying, why have I not been asked to play Dr. Moreau?
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't you see my Dr. Miracle?
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, it's like he's being punished for his relatively crude portrayal of Dr. Miracle as compared to the sophistication of what Lawton was doing.
Exactly.
All of that said, though, I think Lugosi is extremely good as the fur-faced sayer of the law. He's a great kind of pseudo-religious counterbalance to Dr. Moreau. Because Dr. Moreau is a kind of fantastical, godlike figure on the island, isn't he? He stands up there all in white with his whip, banging the gong and essentially getting his beastmen to come out with a prayer. When he asks them what is the law. And you have Lugosi like some anguished priest leading them in that chanting.
What is the law? Not to run on all fours. That is the law. Are we not men? Are we not men? What is the law? Not to eat
Meat. That is the law. Are we not men?
What is the law?
Not to spill blood. That is the law. Are we not men?
Has to be said as well that this is one of the few films Lugosi did where I think his Hungarian accent makes a kind of sense.
Yes.
I mean, again, it's interesting that you didn't recognise him when you initially saw this film, because I think that just proves that his Hungarian accent blends very well here with the monstrous utterances and accents of the other beast men in the film.
That's it. That's exactly it. He's less. He stands out less in this movie compared to other films that he's in. I think. Right.
You know, you mentioned, as Dr. Miracle, he's at times incomprehensible.
Yes.
Because of the line readings he does. His very musical line readings. And I have to say,
yes,
Island of Lost Souls is a film where his musical line readings, they work incredibly beautifully. And I think more of Lugosi's intonations and shapings of lines, I think more of those live in my very sad little memory,
right?
Than his intonations in any other film. I mean, you just have haunting line readings from him here, especially as you get to that climax. The moment where he says, "Law, no more."
Yeah,
that is the point where you know hell is about to be unleashed.
Right, exactly.
And there is no way Moreau is going to be able to wriggle out of things.
Oh, God.
And then spearheading the retribution visited on Moreau. He has two other line readings, which, I absolutely adore. They're skin-crawlingly well done. Because it's the Sayer of the Law who gets the idea of taking Moreau to the House of Pain.
Yes. Yeah.
And he doesn't just indicate the House of Pain, he gives this horrible rising intonation as the idea form, saying, "The House of Pain!"
Yeah.
Pointing towards it. So vile. And then there's another line he has, which is buried quite deep in the soundtrack, as Moreau is pressed onto the table, which is when he points over to the glass cabinet that they're about to smash to get all the metal implements. And, it's Lugosi at his most gleefully malevolent, pointing over and saying, "Little knives." It's fantastic.
Little eye.
So yeah, I feel sorry for Lugosi here, but as so often when he took on small roles beneath his true scope as an actor, I think also of his part in The Body Snatcher a decade later, he does it remarkably well.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that everyone is good in this, aren't they, really? Everyone is great. Kathleen Burke
that's true.
As Lota, the Panther Woman, as well, we should talk about, right? And again,
winner of the National Panther Woman competition, no less, done across the US.
I love this. And again, I suppose, going back to the disturbing themes of bestiality that both these movies deal with, right, as well. But how do you find this character of Lota in this story and this performance?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Mike? Last time we discussed Bride of Frankenstein, and we touched on the fact that many people who come to that film for the first time, they're a bit disappointed that the Bride of Frankenstein herself doesn't do very much.
Yeah.
She's fleetingly featured as, the punchline at the end of an extended joke, really.
Yeah.
Well, I think Island of Lost Souls is the film for those who were a bit disappointed by that element of Bride of Frankenstein.
Right.
Because here, the Panther Woman has a very active and very central role.
She does.
And she's not dissimilar to the Bride of Frankenstein. She's likewise a pitiable creation of a mad doctor. She's likewise weirdly glamorous in a timeless yet also distinctly 1930s way.
Yeah.
And actually she gets to be heroic at the end of this film and have quite a lot of agency in terms of saving the lives of the normal people.
Yeah.
In terms of getting them off the island. So, yeah, there's an awful lot going on with the Panther Woman. She's also quite interesting to compare to later animalistic women that you would get in 1940s.
Yeah, well, I thought of cat people, right?
Yes, that's the one, isn't it? Cat people is a very good example.
Yeah.
And, actually, Universal were to do a cash-in rip-off of Cat People called Captive Wild Woman.
Oh, yeah.
And both Cat People and Captive Wild Woman would generate the odd sequel. But, yeah, the Panther Woman contrasts remarkably with the characters in those later films, in that she's never under any real pressure to pass as a normal woman.
Yeah.
But because she's introduced as this exotic native of the island, she doesn't have to pass as normal. Any strangeness that's actually to do with her having been a panther.
Exactly.
Sounds so silly. You could say, oh, well, it's just one of their strange native ways. All of this. This was probably all right in the early 30s.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I love it.
There is to go back to Cat People and Captive Wild Woman, the Panther Woman does have in common with those later variants this suggestion that the animal side of her erupts most forcefully when she's sexually aroused.
Right, exactly, yeah.
It's in that, actually very painful scene where she's enraptured with Parker and sort of sensually rubbing her body against his, and then eventually they kiss. Mm-hmm. It's in that scene where, first of all, he pulls out of that kiss, and you're inclined to wonder, what did you smell?
Right.
Or taste? That is not the expression you should have on your face after a wonderful kiss.
Right.
You sense there is something up. And then he sees her claws. And we haven't seen her claws up till then. And that to me rather suggests that the claws have erupted as she's become sexually aroused.
Yeah.
And that's certainly what happens in Cat People, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, the Panther Woman's pointing ahead to that stuff as well.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we've got to talk about some of the horror of this, I suppose. And you've mentioned already, the climax, the House of Pain. And I want to finish by talking about the reaction and the way in which this film was banned and everything. But first of all, let's just talk about how that horror is handled, James. I mean, it is... I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it is the idea of the emphasis on pain, right? I wonder if that is what makes this so upsetting, because it's not just about murdering or mutilating or turning people into monsters. It's specifically the kind of the dwelling on the pain and the sort of sadism behind that, I suppose, isn't it? That makes it so disturbing in this film.
And this is very much why I think the masochism and the sadism, that's the great through line in all of Moreau's horrible, perverted kinkiness. That's ultimately the point of these experiments. He is a sadist on a grandiose scale.
Yeah.
And, yeah. We get such an eruption of that with the climax in particular.
Oh, my goodness. It does not fuck around, does it, that final statement?
It certainly does not.
No.
Fart man! Fart beast!
Moreau's fate, I mean, first of all, it seems very much inspired by the ending of Freaks.
Yes, I thought that.
Which is similarly a villain who very much deserves what's coming to them, being hounded by a mob of monstrous characters.
Yeah.
And in both, it's the villainous character being hounded who's drawn the monstrosity out of the characters they're being hounded by. So obviously in Freaks, Cleopatra has tried to poison Hans, who she's married, and with her boyfriend Hercules has been insulting and degrading and dehumanising all the other performers.
Yes.
And then they snap and turn fully monstrous. They become the freaks of the title. They become the freaks she's been determined to see them as. And obviously in Island of Lost Souls, Moreau has turned animals, wonderful animals, beautiful, inspiring animals,
Yeah.
Some of the greatest things on this planet into these subhuman, degraded, constantly pain-riddled horrors.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a parallel there, first of all.
Absolutely.
There's also a great parallel in terms of the basic ambiguity over what happens. I mean, Freaks was heavily edited and heavily censored, and what emerges from that film is Cleopatra screaming in a rainstorm as the performers volley towards her, armed with their weapons. And then we move forward to the carnival, where we see the aftermath, and she's become this legless, half-woman, half-chicken, partially blinded, speechless monstrosity.
Yeah.
We don't really find out how we got from point A to point B there. We can but surmise. Now, with Island of Lost Souls, we don't see the point B at all.
Mm-hmm.
We don't ever see the aftermath of what's done to Moreau, and that's probably a good thing, because I'm not sure I'd ever sleep again, based on how nightmarish the build-up is. As with Cleopatra's fate in Freaks, it definitely hinges on the use of knives. As Lugosi says, little knives.
Yes.
You know, this would be a very nightmarish ending to the film, even if you turned off the soundtrack and it was just the beasts surging in on Moreau with their implements. You know, that would be pretty nightmarish in and of itself. What puts it over the top, though, is the soundtrack. And it's particularly what Charles Laughton does in his performance.
Yes.
He was never one for obvious acting choices. This is a genius acting decision, I think. In that the obvious way to play this would be pain.
Yeah, screams of pain, yeah.
Pain and terror.
Yeah.
Well, you get that with Laughton, but intermixed is Charles Laughton, I think very clearly, playing it like an orgasm.
Yeah.
The entire performance has been packed full of kinkiness. This is the climax of the kinkiness. Literally and figuratively, the climax of the kinkiness.
Yeah.
And it just brings everything to such a brilliant conclusion, insofar as you've had this man of repression who's finally getting this sick sexual release that you get the sense he's been craving all along.
Yes.
Obviously, the greatest horror of what Moreau is doing is the animal cruelty. The fact he's abusing these innocent creatures by visiting surgery and torture on them.
Yeah.
He's an exploiter of animals, basically.
Yeah.
Now, the fact he dies by their hands, on the surface, you know, you sort of think, well, good, you've gotten exactly what you deserve. You are irredeemably monstrous.
Yeah.
Within the bounds of this film, you know, you're getting what's coming to you.
Yeah.
But the fact that Moreau, even in being killed, is enjoying it.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
It's the utmost exploitation.
Yeah.
It rounds off the exploitation and I suppose exalts it to a fever pitch.
It does.
Where even in trying to punish him, he is exploiting them.
Yeah.
You can kill me, but I'm going to enjoy it more than I've enjoyed anything so far in my horrid, squalid, nasty little life. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Well done, Charles Laughton.
Yeah, incredible. It's probably no wonder that people were quite shocked by this film, right? And you mentioned
shocked?
Yeah, could you believe? But you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, this film was actually banned in the UK, right?
No, it was banned all over the shop. Where do we even begin? I mean, this was a pre-code horror film.
Yes.
But that... I mean, all that really meant in practice was, you know, the Hays Office existed even before the Hays Code. They just had more of an advisory role.
Right.
But that wasn't to stop individual states, territories, countries from instigating their own cuts, or indeed outright banning the film.
Right.
So this film it incited a firestorm of backlash and suppression. So it was banned outright in 14 US states.
Wow.
And it was banned in even more than 14 countries. I don't know the exact number.
Mm-hmm.
And in the US states where it was shown, it was cut to ribbons by the numerous state censor boards.
Right, yeah.
Now, by the time Paramount tried to re-release this film in 1941, they were able to do that, but only after they'd cut 20 separate bits, over 20 separate bits of this film they had to cut.
Of course, yeah.
Inflicting nearly as many cuts on the film as the Beastmen inflicted on Dr. Moreau at the end of it.
Yes, all those little knives being taken to the celluloid.
Little knives taken to the celluloid. And yeah, as you say, it was banned in the UK. I think undeniably the element of this film that upset people most, though, was the bestiality.
Yeah.
First with Moreau trying to get Parker and the Panther Woman to mate, and then later on in the film when Parker's fiancée turns up and he's just sending out one of his most brutish looking beastmen to rape her in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
It's just a fiend beyond description, really.
Oh, God, yeah.
So the bestiality element really upset people, and again, it's all the lingering shockwaves created by the theories of Charles Darwin. And
Yes, absolutely.
the fact it presses the animal cruelty buttons, but it also presses those more existential buttons about people not liking to think that we're not a race apart. We are, at the end of the day, just highly evolved animals.
Yeah, exactly. I know. People thought it was blasphemous, didn't they, I think?
Yeah. When Darwin came about, they thought, well, God is dead now.
Right. Right.
There's no way we can accommodate this with our view of the world. But interestingly, we have some paperwork between Paramount and the Studio Relations Committee, actually bringing up the example of Murders in the Rue Morgue as a way they might tackle bestiality, a better way to do it that wouldn't upset people. They brought up the syringe in Murders in the Rue Morgue as a clever way to take the direct emphasis off the sexuality. So, that rather underscores the idea in Murders in the Rue Morgue that the syringe is a symbol, a phallic symbol for the stuff we can't get into any detail about.
Yeah,
Another source of upset was, very unsurprisingly, a line in the film where Charles Horton asks Parker if he knows what it feels like to be God.
Yes.
Which, of course, reminds of that line in Frankenstein, uttered by Colin Clive just after the monster has come to life. As you say, Mike, with people in the wake of Darwin, thinking it was the ultimate blasphemy and, that God was dead, Moreau is wading into that territory, and
it's so interesting.
Getting blasphemous by suggesting he is a god. I think my favourite gobbit of information about Island of Lost Souls live being heavily censored is it was obviously banned in Britain.
Yeah.
And it remained banned in Britain until 1958.
Yeah.
And the last time it was submitted and refused a certificate was 1957, which was the year The Curse of Frankenstein came out from Hammer.
Yeah.
The Curse of Frankenstein, you would think, in full colour, all of that blood, all of that brutality on display, you would think that would be too strong to be released in the UK.
Right.
Oh, it was released. But Island of Lost Souls was still too horrific.
Yeah.
Even at that point.
I love that. But I think there is, I think that goes to show that there is something more disturbing about Island of Lost Souls than there is Curse of Frankenstein, I think, right?
I think it's the bestiality.
It is.
I think it's the bestiality.
Yeah. It's so interesting. What a fascinating film. So, I mean, how do you think it holds up now? I mean, judging by everything we've both said, I mean, it's just as it's every bit as disturbing now as it ever was, I think.
Yeah. I mean, what more is there to be said? It is very, very creaky in places, but you have to remember it's 93 years old. I don't know many 93-year-olds who don't creak a bit.
Absolutely.
It does remain extraordinarily disturbing and very, very haunting.
Yeah.
In a fashion that I don't think is matched by any other horror film of its time.
Yeah.
it was to be followed by two major, I don't know if they're remakes or new adaptations of the H.G. Wells novel.
Mm-hmm.
They both revert to the title, The Island of Dr. Moreau, but they do both riff on elements in Island of Lost Souls. So there are versions made in 1977 and 1996, and I have to say, I've revisited both.
Yeah.
Actually, I visited the 96 version for the first time in preparation for this, and neither of them holds a candle to this original film.
No.
Both the 1977 and 1996 films feel interminably long.
Yes.
Which is odd, because they're not that much longer than Island of Lost Souls.
Yeah.
They're both far less memorable, and inexplicably, the horror feels less visceral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I suppose it's a bit like the Curse of Frankenstein thing you were mentioning there, Mike, where more is shown.
Yes.
But I just don't think the later films engage with the taboo of bestiality to the extent that Island of Lost Souls does. I think that's why they're ultimately less horrific horror films.
Yeah.
So the 1932 film does engage with bestiality. If you look to the 1996 film, I was very surprised, but it's oddly sexless.
Yeah,
the whole film.
It is.
There is, I mean, there is in that film a pan-for-woman equivalent. She remains sovereign. You know, she doesn't get entangled with any of the humans in the film in a sexual fashion.
Yeah.
The 1977 version, though, it's an odd halfway house in that it does embrace the sex, but then it doesn't do very much with the implications. So in that one, you have the traveller actually having full-blown sex with the pan-for-woman equivalent, but the revelation that she was formerly an animal, it's only made explicit right at the end of the film. They both escape the island together, and you get a close-up of her eyes, and they've reverted to their animalistic former state.
Yeah.
But it's so odd that the film doesn't do anything with the bestiality. It just seems totally disinterested, and I kind of get the idea of trying to save up that taboo as a shocking last-minute revelation, but frankly, you know throughout that she's been created from an animal. It doesn't come as a surprise or a shock at the
end.
And that's true even if you're not familiar with Island of Lost Souls, based on the interest that Moreau takes in her.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you really want a proper horror film, Island of Lost Souls is the one to go for.
Yeah, I think so. It tackles, like you say, it's the way it handles those taboos that still work so well to this day. Yeah. Well, there we go. What an interesting, weird double bill of movies that was to discuss, James. I loved it.
It's a very lopsided, very uneven double bill, but you know, as I think you said before we started recording, we've done so many canonical tentpole classics of the genre.
Right.
You know, we've done Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. Last season we did King Kong.
Right.
I'm frankly glad to discuss things that don't quite work.
Yeah.
Because you can loosen up and have more fun with
Completely. I agree with that, and they've been so much fun to discuss. So thank you, James. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining me for all of these big films so far this season. It's been an absolute delight to have you here. And just remind people before you go, where can they find you elsewhere if they want to come and track down any of your work or come find you on social media?
Well, I am still maintaining my Letterboxd account.
Excellent.
I'm still trying to figure out how to use Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram. They're probably the three main places to find me these days. And I should be posting an awful lot going forward about mainly all the Dickens ghost story shows I'm doing to close out the year. So tickets are on sale now for most of those in both London and York. And
excellent.
Yeah, you can find all the details there, and also on my website, jamesswanton.com. And there's also a bit of detail there about a job I did for Hammer recently, which was relevant to this series, recreating Christopher Lee's creature makeup from The Curse of Frankenstein.
It's very cool.
As applied by the brilliant Dave Elsey, who won his Oscar for The Wolfman.
Yeah, loved it. Loved seeing that, and I'm absolutely loving all of these beautiful new additions, these for Hammer Horror releases as well.
Yes, it'll be on their resplendent Blu-ray 4K box set. So
excellent.
I encourage you to part with your money.
Yes, amazing. Oh well, James, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Mike. Thank you for having me back.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to this week's brilliant guest, James Swanton. That was such a fun conversation. What a fun, fucked up pair of movies that was. And if you happen to be in the York area in the next couple of weeks, both James Swanton and I will be attending Dead Northern, the horror film festival happening in York on the 27th and 28th of September. James is, I believe, going to be around all weekend. I'm going to be there with Becky Dark on the 28th, and we are going to be taking part in a live panel discussion discussing the best and worst horror sequels. So Becky, James, and me will all be around at Dead Northern on that weekend, 27th and 28th of September. So come and find us and say hello if you're in the area. So let us know what you thought of this week's episode and what you thought of this week's films, Murders in the Rue Morgue and Island of Lost Souls. You can get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram. You can find me, Mike Muncer, on Blue Sky. If you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, you can join the Evolution of Horror Discord or the Evolution of Horror discussion group on Facebook. If you want to get ad-free versions of episodes and regular weekly bonus content, sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror. We've got a very fun 2-part episode coming up for the spooky season in which we count down the top 50 horror films of the 21st century so far. In the first 25 years of this new century, we asked all patrons to vote for their top 10 favourites. So we're going to reveal the top 50 in a special 2-part countdown episode very, very soon. So if you want to listen to that and a ton of other bonus content, sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror. This podcast is part of the EOH network. You can find this. You can also find our Carry On podcast, Carry On Up the Podcast with Susan Kalman. And you can find our Twin Peaks podcast, The Detective and the Log Lady, wherever you get your podcasts. So, on to next week then. And next week we move from the kind of gothic monster movies of the 1930s to the atomic monster movies of the 1950s. Next week, Kevin Lyons is going to be back on the podcast, and we are going to be discussing 2 big, giant atomic monster classics. We are going to be talking about Them! From 1954 and Tarantula from 1955. It's going to be a very fun double bill. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.